for 10 years, this supposed escalation has been on the table, and for 10 years, we haven't seen it. The Russian Federation's military is underperforming.
Vladimir Putin has threatened to strike Kiev with ballistic missiles that he claims can't be shot down by any air defence system. It follows attacks on Ukraine's power grid, which has left more than 1 million households without electricity today. Putin said it was a response to Ukraine's use of long-range US and UK weapons inside Russian territory. Let's speak to Sarah Ashton Cirillo. She is a sergeant for the Ukrainian Defence Force and is in Kiev. Good evening to you, Sarah.
Good evening, Kate. And I just want to begin by saying thank you for the continued support from the citizens across the United Kingdom, for all of the Ukrainian people, and for us in the Ukrainian Defence Forces.
Well, look, you are going through something quite extraordinary over there at the moment. You've gone to Ukraine from the US to join their territorial army, effectively. You are part of the Ukrainian Defence Force. That is the decision you've made. And I wonder, on days like today, after Russia has struck the country's power grid, and when Kyiv is under threat of being subjected to Russia's new ballistic missile, the Oreshnik, I wonder how you feel about being there.
Kate, I've been on the ground in Ukraine for over 1,000 days. Been in the Defense Forces for over 2 years. And what we're seeing from Vladimir Putin today is just a continuation of what he's famous for, spouting words that the Russian Federation simply cannot back up. We've been able to shoot down all of their missile systems thus far, including their supposed hypersonic missile. And the ballistic missiles that he's threatening us with simply are not being produced in any quantity that would give us concern. The reality is Vladimir Putin is the head of a terrorist state, and with that comes the criminal language that you heard tonight.
Okay. Is Kyiv preparing for an attack? Are there any changes that are being made? Any mobilization on the ground at all?
Ultimately, the people of Kyiv are understanding that it is a constant battle against the Russian terrorism. So while Putin speaks, the people of Kyiv are resolute and continue on with their lives. And today is no different. We saw it last week when the United States suggested that there was an imminent threat to the city. The people of Kyiv continued. The Defense Forces, along with the security services, and of course, the leadership of President Zelensky, has ensured that the people of Kyiv understand what it takes to survive any and all attacks by Vladimir Putin's Russian Federation. And as such, life goes on.
So this missile, the Oreshnik, it's a new type of missile. It flies at 10 times the speed of sound, and according to Vladimir Putin, cannot be intercepted. You would doubt its credentials, would you?
I do. And in fact, if you look back to why all of a sudden he's unveiling this supposed wonder weapon, as some in the press have called it, is most likely in response to President-elect former President Trump's decision in 2018 to call Putin's bluff and remove the United States from the Intermediate Ballistic Missile Treaty with Russia, due to the fact that the United States recognized that Russia was not living up to their side of the treaty. And no doubt this was simply a message to the incoming president of the United States, basically just saber rattling. The notion that all of a sudden, 1,009 days into this full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Vlad Putin is pulling out this weapon to inflict some sort of fear upon the Ukrainian people is laughable.
Look, there were reports in the New York Times last week that unnamed Western officials had suggested giving Ukraine nuclear weapons before Joe Biden leaves office in January. We know that Zelensky has repeatedly complained that the 94 Budapest memo, which basically meant that Ukraine gave its nuclear weapons, inherited from the USSR. It gave them up according to that sort of treaty. Zelensky has repeatedly complained about that. And the assertion is that he would rather have nuclear weapons to defend himself. How do you feel about that? You'd be the person on the front line dealing with the after effects of this, dealing with trying to contemplate how a war using nuclear weapons would play out. Is it just safer that they're not involved from Ukraine's point of view?
Let's back up 1 second. Let's return to the fall and early winter of 2022, when the probability of a nuclear strike against Ukraine from the Russian Federation was at its highest point. iodine pills were being distributed, there was a palpable sense of what could this madman do. Now we follow the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, President Zelensky's leadership. And he was clear when he made the statement as to the deterrence that if our Western partners provided us with the weapons that were not only promised, but actually funded, we would not be in this position of having to even discuss the notion of Ukraine needing any sort of nuclear weaponry. The past is the past. All we can do is focus now on what's happening in 2024, not 1994. Ultimately, the Western partners and the Ukrainian Defense Forces understand that Vlad Putin can be defeated. We just need the partners to step up and deliver what's been promised and continue to support us as this war gets closer to victory for Ukraine.
These recent strikes by Russia, of course, have come about, Vladimir Putin says, in retaliation for the US and the UK giving the go-ahead for Ukraine to use Western long-range missiles inside Russian territory. From your point of view, does President Zelensky just keep ploughing on with this? Is there any concern at all that the more these weapons are used, the more Vladimir Putin can retaliate? And Vladimir Putin has more weapons at his disposal and more resource at his disposal and has North Korean troops now operating on his behalf. Is there any concern about where this escalation could potentially go? Do we need to take a moment?
For 10 years, Vladimir Putin has been discussing escalation. Since he illegally annexed Crimea, there was talk of what came next due to supposed interference by Ukraine's Western partners. So for 10 years, this supposed escalation has been on the table, and for 10 years, we haven't seen it. The Russian Federation's military is underperforming. If you look at the amount of ballistic missiles and different missile types that have been fired at Ukraine in 2024, 60 of them more or less have been North Korean. The Russian Federation is teetering when it comes to their own supply chain, and that's why they're having to import North Korean troops. That's why they're having to import North Korean and Iranian technology. We know that when it comes to the Shaheds and different drones that are being produced in Russia, only 30% of the materials from the supply chain are being produced in Russia itself. 70% are having to come from outside. And so again, he can claim escalation. He can threaten it. We haven't seen it in 10 years, and it's not going to stop Ukraine from doing what's necessary to ensure a just peace and victory against the Russian Federation.
Okay. Look, the United States is urging Ukraine today to quickly increase the size of its military in response to all this. Winter's biting, the full effects not quite there yet in Ukraine. It's going to be a tough winter. So the US says to Ukraine, why not increase the size of your military by drafting more troops and lowering the conscription age to as young as 18? What do you make of that suggestion?
I've personally fought in the coldest weather, minus 20 degrees Celsius, fighting in the eastern reaches, far eastern reaches of Luhansk. So I understand what my brothers and sisters are facing at the front right now because I've lived it. Ultimately, the Ukrainian populace has to decide what the draft age should be, because there is this understanding that you can't just wipe out an entire generation of students when there's nearly 5 million draft eligible men that are currently in country. And so while I can't speculate on political decisions, what I can say is that the manpower is there to start backfilling as needed the different brigades and battalions that are currently at the front, which will allow rotations of some of, as I said, my colleagues who have been there for many months. And I think that's the first step. And while in the United States, we were used to selective service at age 18 and the Vietnam War draft at 18, ultimately, the demographic situation in Ukraine is simply different. And that has to be looked at. So, of course, Ukraine always engages its partners, including from my country, the United States, the United Kingdom, and others, as to what they might advise. But the reality on the ground right now is we do have 5 million, nearly 5 million draft eligible men to be picked from ages 25 and above.
But if it needs to go down to 18, should it?
I've met 19 and 20-year-olds who have been the bravest, best fighters we've had. And I don't think people should be scared of going into battle against the Russian Federation. We have incredible training and incredible leadership. So if it dropped to 18, I don't think it would be the end of the world. But ultimately, that's a decision for the Rada and for President Zelensky.
Look, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much. Please come back and speak to us again soon. Sarah Ashton Cirillo there, who is a sergeant for the Ukrainian Defence Force and in Kiev. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.